Broadcasting from Salisbury University campus, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7. Putting Delmarva first. Stay tuned for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
The town of Berlin celebrates one of the country's oldest instruments, the fiddle. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. On September 22nd, music will fill the air as the 25th annual Berlin Fiddlers Convention gets underway with competitions, food, craft vendors, and beer. History of the fiddle reaches back to the earliest days of the colonists. Indeed, John Udy, a 1620 immigrant, is credited with being the first known fiddler on American soil. Early music was influenced by Irish and Scottish tunes. The South developed its own style, and as it moved westward, this democratizing instrument developed mountain and country forms of music. In our studio this morning is Nate Clendenen. He has been involved in organizing the festival, and welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
So let me ask you this. So let's go a little bit over the history here in terms of how fiddling and this kind of music, because obviously it also combines lots of other instruments as well, but fiddle being probably the standout. Give us a sense about where the origins of this.
Well, basically, bluegrass and old-time music as we know it now descended from European settlers to the United States, as you had mentioned, and basically grew out of what came to be known as mountain music, and mountain music just being very traditional-oriented folk music from mountain folks. What ended up becoming bluegrass was basically a sped up, almost a rock and roll almost version of it. But the way that we have it now, bluegrass has evolved into a lot of different forms, but all centered around this traditional setup of being built around a fiddle, banjo, mandolin, guitar, and bass.
What do you think makes this fiddle so special, and how? And obviously the question becomes, how do you define the difference between that and, say, violin? In terms, they are obviously the same instrument, but
Very
they're
true.
done differently.
True. Yes, it's an approach. It's a feel. A fiddle is no different than a violin in terms of the actual instrument. It's just how it's played. Between bluegrass and old time, those are two different disciplines of playing. I myself am not good enough at the fiddle to be able to really describe it in words. However, it's very easily heard. Old time fiddle styles are more rolling, and they just, that's the way that I think about it, at least. They just keep going. And bluegrass is more like a hard-lined, fast approach, more of a finesse approach. Another way to describe it, Cajun music is another offshoot of this as well. And if anyone's familiar with something like that, and even Celtic music, but all of those four that I just mentioned, old-time, bluegrass, Cajun, and Celtic, if you can think of them, it's easy to hear where the approach is different. And it's all about technique. It's all about how the instrument is actually played.
So I just ran across a phrase in which describing the fiddler as playing the instrument wrong. That is, that there's these differences. I mean, in terms of it, whether there aren't for instance, chin rests, that kind of thing, is and a lot of double stops. Double stops obviously being two notes done at the same time.
Yeah.
So what is that like? Since you've played a bit, what is that like to play that kind of music and that kind of genre?
Well, for me personally, once again, I'm not really a fiddler at all. I always joke when I go play gigs with my great fiddle friends that I show up to the gig to watch them play, and I just get to stand next to them. For me, I don't know. It's just an engaging genre of music. It's an engaging. It's very accessible to a lot of people. It's born out of poor country folks in the mountains that this is how they entertain themselves. It's a very accessible, basic almost type of music, and I think that translates on a lot of levels, both for me as a performer or, of bluegrass, and other performers. Like, it's just fun, but it translates on other levels for those who are watching it or listening to it. Like, it's just really fun.
How do you say contrast it with, say, I know you play guitar. How do you contrast the two instruments? Obviously much different, but
True. It's all kind of about the role that I can think of, in the difference of that. Like a guitar in this context is a rhythm instrument, so it provides the backbone, and the fiddle is more of the lead instrument. And once again, as I mentioned earlier, like, bands are kind of built around those lead instruments. Guitar, now you can play fiddle tunes on a guitar, and all the rest of the instruments in bluegrass as well. It's just nice to bang out some chords and watch these fiddlers go. It's really fun.
So what got you involved with, particularly with bluegrass and with this kind of genre? What appeals to you as opposed to, say, any other form of music?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, how I got into it personally, my parents are both from Virginia, and are both vocalists, and grew up with mountain music. So I'd always been familiar with it growing up, and we listened to it a lot. And when in my early 20s, I knew bluegrass songs and had played lots of bluegrass songs before, but I met a banjo player when I was living in Virginia myself, and he kind of showed me some of the standard songs, and we started playing bluegrass. And the more that I did it, it came naturally to me in terms of how I approach music personally. And once again, referencing what I said earlier about how kind of basic and accessible it is. It's bluegrass is an old time. It's great music just to pick up and do. Once again, the chord structures aren't necessarily that complicated a lot of times. So, as long as you got the rhythm together, it's really easy just to sit down and play. And it's very, just a great way to socialize and share things with other people. And once again, it's just accessible.
One of the things that struck me, by the way, is it and there maybe there's a relationship, but it strikes me that while they are obviously different forms of music, blues, that we've come to know it, that there's a reflection of that, I think, in bluegrass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a correlation. At least I feel there's a correlation across the board with folk music in general. Now, folk can be broadened to include straight up, folk singer-songwriter stuff, blues, bluegrass, just roots music in general. There's a lot of correlations. The chord structures, once again, are relatively basic, and you can also incorporate certain licks here and there. Like, there's definitely some crossovers, but I think that really just boils down to the roots and the real folk cultural aspects of those musics that are all very similar.
And also they seem to tell a story.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about that. And is that one of the things that attracts you?
Definitely. I mean, music in general is the original form of history, basically. At least telling stories and passing on certain stories to other generations. A lot of the stories in bluegrass involve heartache and murder, but
usual thing.
The subject matter, is could be a little daunting at times, but and once again, like you said, just telling stories and in combination of the folk aspects of it, they're not complicated stories. They're stories that and subjects that everyone can understand.
Do you think they're stories of the people as opposed to others? I mean, do you think that it gets to that ground level of where people live?
It can. It certainly does.
I mean, I think a lot of songs that deal with, as you said, heartache or sometimes murder, right? As for example, which is not the norm.
True. Luckily, most people don't know much about that, and let's hope it stays that way. But let's see. I had something formulated and I totally spaced it. ask me the question again.
It seems to me that bluegrass and that kind of music really is sort of at ground level. It's where people live, as opposed to, say, other forms of music.
True. Yes. And I think it can be maybe characterized in the essence that like a lot of bluegrass band names are indicative of where these bands come from, or where you grew up with, where your roots actually are. And listening to those songs, those are songs of those people's experience from where they're from. We write songs here on the shore. I'm sure that our contributions, the imagery is more salt grass and water and wind, whereas maybe the imagery in the mountains would be more, mountain oriented or farming oriented, or, flooding, or just stuff that is specific from where these people, where folks come from, telling their story of their experience. Once again, though, like you're saying, from a ground level, from a very fundamental, basic level.
So when you were growing up, were there particular groups that you liked in bluegrass? I mean, somebody that struck you?
Well, I had an epiphany recently that I really enjoy female songwriters and performers, and I mean I enjoy all sorts, but I've always there's some great folks out there, and it occurred to me that I was raised on Emmylou Harris and Dolly Parton, and not that was something that I didn't realize, but maybe it's something that has translated into how I approach music today, or what I really like about a lot of music today.
Anything in particular that you liked about them, or
well, they're just
is it
so
more
good.
soulful, or
it's maybe it's just aesthetic, maybe it's just how it all sounds, or something, and basically, well, a little more along the lines of that. Emmylou and Dolly were I think the first bluegrass performers, and they don't do bluegrass all the time either.
Right.
I should note that, but that started formulating my aesthetic in this, and then through that, I later have discovered Tony Rice, and Tony I just think is somebody who I base a lot of my approach to the guitar on. I'll never be able to pick like him, but and bluegrass is such a large family, even at the top levels of the business, people just in this. Ties into the community aspect of it. I mentioned earlier, people just play together, and all you need to do is get into one person and then see who those people played with, and then it just keeps expanding into just an endless amount of great music.
Oftentimes, by the way, and in some of the musics that I've seen here, even on the shore, is that various groups that they will interchange. That you'll see one group of people, and then one person will disappear, somebody else will show up, or maybe somebody will come in and play with them. It seems almost as if there's a certain sort of free form, I guess, in some ways about the music.
Well, there's a lot of traditional songs. There's a very large songbook of material that basically everybody knows, which is definitely not the case in rock and roll or jazz. Well, maybe a bit in jazz, because there certainly are standards in jazz. But in rock and roll and other forms of music, you don't have this. Everyone has a certain amount of songs that people have been playing for 100 years, and that's awesome. That lends itself to a lot of just random creativity. I played shows this weekend with one person I had never even met before, let alone played with, and it was just, we had a lot of common stuff, and it was, all we had to do was count it off and say what key it was in, and we were off. A
lot of improvisation, I guess.
Yes,
which I guess is which makes it, I think, in some ways similar, but not exactly similar to like jazz. Jazz, in which there's a lot of improvisation, and I've seen where so you write, for instance, if you have the fiddler, and he comes on, does his thing. It may not be exactly the same thing the next time he plays, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of room for creativity, and in a lot of these fiddle tunes, meaning instrumental songs with certain melodies and rhythmic qualities. There's a lot of room to expand on them, and it's, once again, it's not, bluegrass is certainly more of a finesse approach per se to say old time, but either way, both of the genres or subgenres, there's a lot of room just to expand and just to try something new, and it can be very, very, very fun.
So you have, amongst other things, I've talked a little bit about some of the folks who are showing up, the Eastman String Band, and this thing that's called alt grass sound. What is alt grass?
You know,
can you tell
I wish
me
we had
exactly
Tim
what
here
sounds,
to really tell you that. I think it's just that they play some stuff that's a little bit outside the box.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, there are some bands that you'll hear, or that anyone can hear, that's they'll play straight traditional music. All the material they're playing is very old, and in bluegrass there's in old time there's a certain respect and focus on tradition. Now, once again, some bands focus solely on that tradition, which is awesome. Some bands take that, like Tony Rice, when the New Grass revival, when those folks came, extremely progressive, and the way that things have evolved 30, 40 years later, they're maybe not as progressive. I mean, they're certainly not as progressive now in terms of throwing new things in as they were then. But with the alt grass, it's that's just the way they describe their brand of what they do. I mean, they do plenty of traditional stuff, but they do other covers as well, and just other stuff, and incorporate some newer things into it.
And also, you highlighted the Last Minutemen. Who are they? They're apparently from Delmarva. And what kind? Are they more traditional? What's
there? It'll be interesting to see what they do in their set. They assembled last year for the competition, and it's a handful of guys from around here that play a lot together. And Mickey Justice, he's been a part of several of the winning bands over the years under my tenure at the festival. And I'm trying to think who else was in that group.
So we've got Wes
Parks,
Mickey,
Josh.
basement Larry Lynch.
Yeah. Basically, yeah. Wes and Mickey are two great bluegrass pickers. Wes lives down on the Eastern Shore of Virginia. Mickey lives locally here. They came together and played, and I believe last year was their first time together as this specific group. However, once again, bluegrass is a very wide open, family-oriented thing. These guys have all been playing together for years, and that's what they ended up playing as last year, and they won. So,
but by the way, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the country grass. I've seen them a number of times, even in some open mic venues. They'll stop by and play and so on and so forth. Tell me a little bit about them. They seem more traditional.
Definitely, and they do some outside the box stuff too, some more country oriented stuff. But I believe it was 1980 when Bill Vollmer, who's plays mandolin around here, they got that band started. They've just been around for a while. I mean, they're kind of the Eastern Shore, as far as I know, the Eastern Shore's original bluegrass group. And they do all sorts of stuff in and around Berlin. And they've been, for years, have been hosting the Sunday Jam, which happens kind of as like to cap off the festivities of the Fiddlers Convention. And that's always fun. There's tons of people involved with that, and it's a great way to spend a Sunday afternoon.
And by the way, you mentioned that you have a new championship, a flat picking championship.
Yes, the Maryland State Maryland State Flat Picking Guitar Championship.
Right.
Yeah, basically with a bluegrass guitar state championship. There's an event out in Western Maryland that had hosted the state championship for fiddle, banjo, and mandolin, I believe, and they weren't doing the guitar part, and I called them, and after a lot of phone calls, we were able to assert that we were going to do the guitar championship this year, which is very exciting, and I don't know. I can't wait. It's a great way for this event. This marks the 25th anniversary of the Berlin Fiddlers Convention, and so this has been going a while, and it'll be nice to start this part of the tradition as well with the championship.
Now, obviously, you play the guitar. What do you think is the hardest thing about, say, flat picking?
For me, it's the technique, and it's funny. Like it's called a flat pick for a reason because
Right.
it's so thick that it doesn't bend.
Doesn't bend, yeah.
And when I first started playing with a flat pick myself, was right at the start of when I started learning true bluegrass, and it was really complicated. However, now I play my electric guitars with a flat pick, and I think just the technique of it. Like bluegrass is a very physical way to play music. I mean, it's very fast, it's very clean. Like it can be very challenging as basic as the songs are set up. It can be very, very challenging to play. My biggest challenge is just staying in shape. I mean, seriously, my elbow is sore from these gigs this past weekend. Just from the amount of work we're doing out there.
So, what is it? Do you think that? I mean, this, as you say, this festival's been going on about 25 years. It seems to get a big draw. It seems to be a lot of people. Are we looking at people when they come there? Are they coming from other parts of the region or the country, or is this a predominantly local audience? How do you read that?
Honestly, people come from all over the region. Some folks have come from farther away than others, but I mean it's an annual thing, and once again, the testament of bluegrass and old time in general is like it's very accessible, and it's naturally just kind of fun to watch. But there are tons of people that make their yearly pilgrimage down to the shore at this time because you're able to come to this event, and Berlin hosts plenty of super fun events. This one is the only one of its kind and has been going the longest, and it's just always encouraging to see people of all ages really enjoying themselves. And I mean, and it's very family friendly, extremely family friendly. There's always, children dancing in front of the stage, and behind them is their grandparents, and it's people of all walks of life and all ages. It just appeals. Bluegrass is a very wide open thing and appeals to a lot of people.
And this obviously is a big event for, say, Berlin, but I assume that you have these kinds of conventions and festivals around the country.
Mm-hmm. All over the place.
Yeah.
In fact, when the first Fiddlers Convention I ever went to was the Galax Fiddlers Convention in Galax, Virginia, which happens the first full week in August every year. And this year, I did not go this year, sadly. I think it was the 82nd or 3rd, something in the 80s. And it's the oldest running and largest Fiddlers Convention in the country. And there are tons all over this region. Virginia, Gettysburg has a big bluegrass event, and yeah, we're happy. Ours is definitely a lot smaller scale than some of the other ones. Galax, for instance, goes for an entire week. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of competitors, and ours is obviously considerably more compact than that. But it's nice to be a part of a much larger national tradition. This is, bluegrass and old time music is very much a part of the national fabric on a lot of levels. And, it's nice to be a part of that, and that we can have a little bit of that here on the shore.
So, some have suggested that bluegrass tends to be sort of a niche kind of music. For instance, there will be radio stations that will put it on, and then if they take it off, they hear that the fans seem to be very passionate about it. I mean, is there a limiting quality, do you think, to the music? What do you think? I mean,
possibly.
I guess that's true. All music, I guess, in one way or another.
If you don't like twang, like if you don't like fiddles, then you're probably not going to like bluegrass. It is definitely something that does have a niche in general, but once again, it's bluegrass has never really been pop music, so there's been certainly people, Alison Krauss, I think, is the best example, and Dolly Parton can, have crossed over back and forth between pop music and bluegrass. But I just think that it just hasn't been tainted by pop in the essence that, like, it's still kind of a pure form. Even the folks that are playing really outside the box stuff, very non-traditional bluegrass, it's still more traditional than, country music or whatever. So, I mean, people inevitably will formulate some passions for it, because it changes, but, real bluegrass is a certain thing. Real country music can be a million things. Like, real bluegrass is definitely a certain thing.
Do you think that explains some of the passion that people have? I mean,
sure.
Way to get a pushback if it disappears, kind of thing.
I mean, it's definitely, it's very personal to people, and that could be for any number of reasons, but there's just a lot more involved with bluegrass and old time, than top 40 country music, songs about trucks and whatever, which is fine. Don't get me wrong. That's totally cool. Okay. Trucks are fine, but, I think freight trains carry a whole lot more emotion with them than a truck does.
I hope you don't lose any audience for that.
Yeah, well, and just to clarify, in bluegrass, there are a lot of songs about freight trains. That was my reference there.
That's true. Well, we were speaking with Nate Clendenen. He has been organizing the festival, which is the 25th annual Berlin Fiddlers Convention, which gets underway on September 22nd, runs the entire weekend, and we'll probably see a lot of folks out there. Appreciate you stopping by and attending with us.
And I will say, this is a large team effort. So, yes, I've definitely had a lot to do with the planning sides, but there's a lot of great folks with Berlin Chamber of Commerce who puts on this event, and then a great team of folks in Berlin that are all working on this. I'm just the guy that came in to talk about it.
Well, we appreciate you.
They send me here to talk.
Well, we've been talking again with Nate Clendenen, or one of the organizers of the festival. I appreciate you stopping by. This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Production and audio engineering by Chris Frank. Hosted by Don Rush. For podcasts, visit delmarvapublicradio.net or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on Pack 14.